Well, I agree with the point that Catherine made, and this is not at all uncommon, as both you gentlemen know, for a prosecutor to take one of any number of cases. Let's deal with homicide. Pick the one that is the strongest and run with it, because if you get your conviction there, and you're going for first degree especially, then, what difference does it make? And why possibly weaken your presentation and maybe even conceivably jeopardize the ultimate outcome by allowing the defendant to raise some doubts and some questions about, cases 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and thereby give a good defense attorney the opportunity to argue to a jury, well, ladies and gentlemen, you see how weak the evidence is in this case and in that case, and you're not going to buy what the prosecution has presented to you in the other. So that's the way it goes. I do not have the familiarity with these cases that both you and obviously the Catherine has, but from the little that I do know about it, I tend to believe that the odds are that he is guilty of the other cases too.
And, obviously, maybe we can't speak on this on a personal level, and both of you can weigh in on this, and then I'll let Jeff ask the next questions. Can you still get closure if you're a family member, if there's one conviction of one, but no really final say on the others? Do you still think that those families of the other 5, that there was no trial, there was no evidence brought up against those other cases, you could still get closure maybe, even though there was a conviction, and just in your heart you believe that it was John Norman Collins, and you can let it go at that if you're a member of one of the others that were not convicted on?
Catherine, you're the...
Go ahead, Colin.
I don't think you can get closure, because you don't have the whatever satisfaction you can get from knowing that the focus has been on your loved one, that people have cared enough to really take it through its paces. And if that doesn't happen, there's always that doubt and that wondering,
Sure.
Could they have gotten the same kind of results in the case of my relative or my loved one? I don't think there's closure for that.
We're highlighting your book, Devil's Dozen. You also wrote a book on serial killers. Of course, Sarah Weck's latest is A Question of Murder, and a couple other great ones I'm reading right now, Tales from the Morgue and Mortal Evidence. We're looking at Devils on the screen now, A Question of Murder. Catherine, what book is this now that how many have you written?
36.
36. I shorted you 2 before we went on the air. I apologize. Wow. Give us that webpage real quick if you can.
CatherineRamsland.com.
Okay, very good. And they can find out, they have a list of all the books she's written. Very, very good. Go ahead, Jeff. You had some questions for Catherine.
Just a question about this case. Actually, good evening. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. Jeff Hansen, local police officer here in Taylor, Michigan. And it's nice to thank you for coming on the show with us. And I really like the question is, you wrote this book about this case. They found evidence at this John Norman Collins at his home. They found evidence that was from the first victim?
What I understand is that they said they found the evidence, which was, I think, a medallion, and that he claimed he had never seen before, and in later years he has stated that he thinks the police planted that. Okay. Of course, they deny that, but that leaves the evidence itself ambiguous.
And he's been in jail for, 40 years now? 41 years now. And obviously trying to, I don't know what his claim is, that he's trying to get out of jail or
no,
he's
he
trying
wants to get to Canada.
Canadian citizenship.
All he wants to do is go to Canada because they do not have life in prison there. That's the case?
Well, that's the hope, I guess, for him, is that eventually he'll get some freedom.
And an actual relative of his, who was a state police officer, is the one who gave up, who turned him in, his uncle.
His uncle, yeah.
And based on how did that come about? I didn't read up on that enough to see how did his uncle come to the conclusion that his own nephew was the killer.
His uncle had left on vacation, and Collins had taken care of his residence, and had there was a murder during the time the uncle was away. When he came back, he noticed certain odd things in the basement. that he hadn't been in the places where he thought they should be. Then neighbors said that they had seen Collins coming in and out with his motorcycle. And so it was just piecing together a number of things that made the uncle suspicious, and especially when he saw some stains on the floor, which actually didn't turn out to be blood, but they looked like it at the time. And so then he confronted his nephew, and at that time there were other things already closing in on him. There had been a witness who had seen the victim get on a motorcycle with a young man. She had a very good, clear look at him. So someone else had kind of started closing in on him. Between all the factors, all the circumstances, they made an arrest.
Thank you. That's...
Cyril, when we see cases like this, we've supposedly, I believe there were some strands of hair found there. Some blood was found. I believe I had heard rumors that there had been painting over top of that blood. Is that really the final? Is that the damning evidence right there? I mean, does that really shut it when you actually? And then that person says that they had no connection and did not know that person, but yet they find fibers and what have you. Does that pretty much seal the case?
Well, it's very strong. If you have no physical connection, directly or through one or more intermediaries or intermediate places where such kind of transfer might have occurred, then obviously it places a very heavy burden on the defendant to explain how his hair, blood, fibers from his suit jacket or pants got somewhere. This goes back to Locard's principle, which Catherine and I are so familiar with back around the 1920s. I think a very famous French criminalist who made the observation that anytime there is an altercation, a physical confrontation, I don't know the exact French words that he used, between two people, there is going to be some transfer of some kind of material. Now, of course, for him to have made that observation in the 1920s, sometime before we got into the kinds of trace forensic evidence that we deal with now, not only DNA, but as Catherine pointed out several minutes ago, I don't want to, and I don't say this in a critical way, and nor do I mean it to be universally applicable in retroactive fashion, but I think we would all agree that the kinds of investigations that took place decades ago, it was one thing to read about it in Sherlock Holmes, and to see it depicted with Sidney Toiler in those wonderful Charlie Chan movies that I enjoyed as a kid. But in real life, they were not doing the kinds of investigations that we have come to expect from police now. It's just a totally different ballgame. So, getting back to your question, it depends on whether there is any kind of plausible explanation. Because if there is not, then you got to deal with the idea that the police planted something, and sometimes that can sell. I think to some extent it was not the major feature of the O.J. Simpson case, but it was a feature. And once the jury had doubts created in their minds for different reasons, whether it was Furman's use of the N-word, whether it was the glove that did not fit, and so on, then it became an easy obstacle for them to hurdle over and to believe that a blood spatter was placed on a sock at his residence. You see, so it all depends on how the whole case goes in.
Right, the blood, going back to the police planning things, and that goes back even to the, I think we're going to talk about this case later on another show, about the fatal vision. They actually, I believe they said that somebody planted something there. That was one of the defenses of the gentleman, Jeffrey McDonald, the physician.
Well, that's a fascinating case. And
you've written on it, Dr. Witt.
Yes, and
Catherine and I can talk about that. That should take a whole program in and of itself.
Actually, I think we're going to do that in a couple of days.
If we come back with that, Catherine, perhaps we'll have you and Dr. Witt both on.
I'd love to talk about that. That's a very interesting case.